Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. We are seeing the impact of the Trump administration's zero-tolerance policy for illegal immigration at the border. It means adults coming into the U.S. without authorization are being criminally prosecuted, and children coming with them can be taken away, at least temporarily. Images of children being separated from parents and parents being held in large locked cages are generating strong reaction, including disapproval from 4 former first ladies, as well as the current one, Melania Trump. In a new CBS News poll, 67% of Americans call separating children from parents unacceptable. That includes 90% of Democrats. Republicans are split on the issue. 39% find it unacceptable. 36% see it as acceptable. Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who ordered the zero-tolerance policy, says he is simply enforcing immigration laws. But those laws do not require the separation of children and parents. The Trump administration is now choosing to enforce the law differently. Over 5 weeks, more than 2,300 children have been taken from their parents. CBS News correspondent David Begnaud got a look inside one of the facilities where immigrant children are being held. Here's what he saw.
This is the video the government gave us to show you. We were given 15 minutes to write down what we saw. We couldn't bring our cameras. Men, women, and children are kept in large fenced-in cages. They are segregated according to how they cross the border.
We were talking about very, very high numbers.
Manuel Padilla Jr. is chief of the Rio Grande Valley Border Patrol sector.
It's not just a very simple issue of separating the families. We have to look at this broader, without emotion and objectively. And at the end of the day, we actually have to do something about the current immigration law that has many loopholes.
Has illegal immigration gotten so bad that separating families is the best way to deter people from coming illegally?
That is one of the only options.
The process is complex with many variables, but generally, under the zero-tolerance approach, after parents are subject to criminal proceedings, minors are reclassified as unaccompanied alien children. 72 hours is the maximum holding time until they are placed in one of approximately 100 shelters. The goal is placement with a family member who's already living in the U.S. If a parent seeking a claim of asylum is denied, the policy is for them to be reunited with their child, but that process can take weeks. We wanted to know what the people of McAllen think about what's happening.
Whether you like him or not, Trump, he at least is trying to do something to secure our country.
This is Rudy Cisneros, a Mexican-American Army veteran.
And again, not taking away from what these kids are going through. And I understand people want a better life, but there's a process and there's a way. We are a nation of laws.
I've seen them before, like right there.
You might think Belinda Garcia would support the president's policies. She lives a quarter mile from the Rio Grande River, where migrants swim across and then run through her backyard. She says her fence is bent because of it. Yet she doesn't support the zero-tolerance policy of prosecuting every person who enters illegally. And she doesn't want to see families separated.
I don't think they should be prosecuted just because they're crossing the border.
Meanwhile, President Trump says don't blame him for separating undocumented immigrant families. He says laws need to change. Major Garrett is at the White House.
The United States will not be a migrant camp.
President Trump blamed congressional Democrats again today for his administration's family separation policy.
If the Democrats would sit down instead of obstructing, we could have something done very quickly.
But it was the administration that instituted the so-called zero-tolerance policy of prosecuting any adult who crosses the border illegally and then separating them from their children or accompanied minors.
We have to do our job. We will not apologize for doing for our job.
Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen.
These minors are very well taken care of. Don't believe the press.
The backlash against the Trump administration policy has been bipartisan. House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi toured a detention facility near San Diego.
Do they think these children deserve less than their children do?
Louisiana Republican Senator John Kennedy called the situation a hot mess.
I don't have any problem whatsoever allowing children of those who are coming in illegally to stay with their parents.
And 4 former First Ladies also weighed in, led by Laura Bush, who wrote in a Washington Post op-ed, "This zero-tolerance policy is cruel, it is immoral, and it breaks my heart." Michelle Obama tweeted the article, writing, "Sometimes truth transcends party." Hillary Clinton spoke out in New York.
Separating families is not mandated by law at all. That is an outright lie.
Even the current First Lady, Melania Trump, released a statement that said she hates to see children separated from their families. She added that the U.S. must be a country that follows all laws, but also a country that governs with heart.
I share their concerns, but Congress is the one that needs to fix this.
This policy is not, by your definition, in any way cruel.
It's not a policy. Our policy at DHS is to do what we're sworn to do, which is to enforce the law.
CBS News Chief White House correspondent Major Garrett is at the White House, and CBS News correspondent David Begnaud is in McAllen, Texas. Major, first to you. Secretary of Homeland Security Kirstjen Nielsen said Monday that only Congress is able to change the policy of family separation at the border. But can you please once more underscore that this is a Trump administration decision, as I understand it, that is an enforcement decision that was well within the president's control?
Yes, there is an important aspect of discretion here. And the discretion exercised by this administration differs from the discretion exercised by the Obama and Bush administrations. Both the Bush and Obama administrations did, in certain limited situations, separate families at the border. What's different now is the order of magnitude. A zero-tolerance policy treats everyone stopped at the border as a criminal, therefore subject to prosecution. Everyone is prosecuted. When everyone is prosecuted, those children traveling with them must be separated because adults and children cannot be placed in the same detention facility. That is the difference. Not the fact that you have to separate, but if you stop everyone and treat everyone as a potential criminal and prosecute them as such, then this separation must be universal. That's why the numbers are so much larger. That's why the magnitude of this story is so much larger. That is an act of prosecutorial discretion. Now, the Department of Homeland Security says the law is the law, and when you enforce the law, you're supposed to do it across the board without fear or favor. That's one characterization. Other administrations looked at exactly the same law, Republican and Democrat, and came to fundamentally different conclusions about the extent to which they would enforce that letter of that law. This administration is taking it to the absolute hilt and is dealing with, to put it mildly, and these are words of other administration figures I spoke to today, dealing with a public relations crisis of enormous magnitude.
David, let me turn to you. Secretary Nielsen was asked why the video released from the child detention facilities only show boys in detention and did not include girls or young toddlers. And I want to ask you, I know you've been on these tightly controlled tours and been told what you are allowed to get images of, which is nothing from what I understand, and only been given handout video by the government. Did you see any girls or small children on your tour? Perhaps the better question is, were you allowed to see those facilities where young girls and toddlers are housed?
Yeah, in fact, they're all here, right behind me. That's it, 55,000 square feet. There were various cages. You had a cage with fathers and children, a cage with mothers and children, a cage with children by themselves. It's all how they came across the border. If the dad came with the baby, then the dad and the baby are detained together. If the kids came alone, they're detained together. Yeah, we saw girls. We also saw toddlers. I saw women holding what appeared to be almost infants up to 1, 2 years old in their arm. I saw young girls running around, eating an apple, eating potato chips. They were there. A lot of this has to do with sort of some social media pickup over the last 72 hours where people have said, where are the girls? Where are the toddlers? And what's happening with that is, there's a camp, for example, Elaine, in West Texas, in Tornillo, that we know boys are being sent to, right? We have pictures of that camp. My colleague Maria Villarreal has been reporting from there. What we haven't narrowed in on or gotten confirmation on is where the girls are going, right? We know there are dozens of facilities around the country, but where are they? We've asked the questions and we haven't gotten those answers. I have to tell you, there is some behind-the-scenes frustration among Border Patrol officials around the country, but specifically here in South Texas, that Border Patrol is pretty much carrying the water for the federal government. They're taking the heat, they're taking the blowback, they're answering the questions, and the Department of Health and Human Services and other aspects of DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, are not coming out and not answering enough questions. Let me tell you, with a little bit of candor, this journalist was only allowed to ask 2 questions at a press conference. You cannot fully expect to appreciate the context of a story when you get to ask 2 questions.
Major, let me ask you, we know that President Trump made a promise to his voters, his supporters, that he would get Mexico to pay for a border wall. And that is a promise he has reiterated will be kept. Now the question becomes, politically, as this issue of immigration reaches such an emotional point, some are asking whether or not this particular issue of family separation is being used as leverage to get Congress to vote for border wall funding.
Well, Kirstjen Nielsen, the Department of Homeland Security Secretary, denied that emphatically at this afternoon's late briefing here at the White House. And to David's point, one of the reasons the Homeland Security Secretary came to the White House briefing room was to take some of the heat, if only temporarily, off of Border Patrol on the front lines of this story, and at least be responsive to a good number of questions posed by myself and my other White House reporting colleagues. Now, she said this is not an effort to leverage Congress. The children are not being used as pawns. But the absolute practical reality is lawmakers are now jumping into this issue, saying we've got to do something. We can put bills together to keep families together, to put more judges, more resources, more money behind the process of adjudicating immigration appeals cases. All of that is now gaining real political velocity. And yet, the White House said this afternoon, if that's not accompanied, meaning that legislation, by real and larger funding for a border wall, not from Mexico, but from U.S. taxpayers, the White House will not sign on to it. So what the White House wants in this superheated political atmosphere is not a narrow remedy to this particular problem, but a comprehensive one. That's its words, the White House's words, which includes border wall funding. So they can deny that the children are being used as pawns. They can deny that this is not being used as a point of leverage. But even so, if those lawmakers, many of them Republicans, are serious about engaging on this issue, then it's going to be up to this White House to decide what it wants, a legislative deal or this continued story. If the Department of Homeland Security and this Trump administration back down, somehow lighten this zero-tolerance policy, many Republicans I've talked to said that will make them look weak, especially to Trump supporters expecting a hard-line approach to border security. And if there can't be a legislative fix, then this situation persists and gets worse over time.
And David, as we've heard, some of those who would want a harder line taken say, while they're sympathetic to the separation of families, that in fact this is still a nation of laws, and that even though they can understand people wanting to leave for a better life, that the people coming in must respect those laws. But at the same time, advocates for some of these people seeking asylum would argue it is not about seeking a better life. It is a life or death situation. What are you hearing about why families and children are seeking asylum in the United States and leaving their home countries?
You know, I'd like to be able to stand before you and tell you that I was able to interview someone and find out their story. We were told we couldn't. When we were allowed inside, we were told you've got 8 minutes. It turned into 15, and about the only thing we were able to do was ask a young boy who said he was from Guatemala, appeared to be roughly between 12 and 14 years of age. We asked him how he was doing, and he smiled, and he said, just fine. He said that to us in Spanish. And then we sort of got the look that the principal would give you from a Border Patrol agent and reminded that we were not supposed to ask any questions. Look, the bottom line, Elaine, our experience on the ground, and I have not been covering this issue for weeks or months, but I've been here for the last 48 hours, and in the last 48 hours talking to a lot of people, covering as much ground as possible, it seems as though everyone is very settled in where they believe and fall on this issue. As I talk, there's a man who just walked up and is yelling. He said it's unfortunate the weakest people have to pay
the hardest price, I believe. He doesn't appear to be a supporter of Mr. Trump. He pulled up in an 18-wheeler and stopped it right behind our camera. My crew actually was sort of motioning to see if we could move him along, but it seemed like he wanted to make a point of protest. To that point, people are settled on this issue. I've not known many people to budge. However, what we have experienced is that those who have settled on the issue but actually walked in the shoes of those affected have come away perhaps with a more balanced mindset than they arguably had in the beginning. But again, Elaine, it's hard to find people who are sort of middle of the road on this issue. They're very set. And by the way, you might think that all the people around here are supporters of President Trump, and because they live near a border, they are just all for this, prosecute everyone. That's not the case at all. In fact, we found just the opposite.
Finally, Major, let me ask you, since the Trump administration announced this zero-tolerance policy, has the administration offered any legislative solutions of its own?
Well, it's sent conflicting signals to House Republicans, currently the only part of Congress that's actively considering any legislation on immigration at all. Senate Republicans, meaning the Senate leadership that runs the Senate, which is Republican, has basically said the immigration debate this year is over. We had some votes, they didn't go anywhere, we're done. Unless the politics there changes dramatically, and this kind of issue just might do that, it's a dead letter in the Senate. But the White House has sent today one consistent message. There are two pieces of legislation pending. The White House supports both of them. That's not what the White House said last week, so it's had a hard time getting its own message straight and understanding what it will or will not accept from the House. And I'm willing to bet that until there is actually legislation that passes at least one body, and in this case it would more likely be the House, the White House is not really going to be definitive about what it will or will not accept, because the politics of this story are only beginning to get hotter. And if they get hotter still, the White House may have to recalibrate. One final point, Elaine, because in your question to David, the last one, you talked about asylum. And it is important in this story to distinguish between asylum seekers and those who are seeking to cross the border illegally. The administration has said and repeated emphatically today, if you are seeking asylum for political reasons or for fear of life and limb, if you come to a port of entry in the United States, you will not be separated. You will not be dealt with harshly in any way, shape, or form. Your application will be reviewed, but you will not be separated. The problem with that is many immigrants don't know where the ports of entry are, point one. Point two, some who have showed up at those ports of entry have been turned away. Why? Because there's not enough personnel to deal with their case. So that has created also a flow to the border itself, not through a port of entry. So there are at least two different categories. People who are crossing the border illegally, not seeking asylum, just trying to get to America by any way that they can. And then asylum seekers. The administration does like to point out, and it's worth giving them their due on this, that if you're an asylum seeker and you go through the proper channels, in no way, under no circumstances, will you be separated from your children who are accompanying you. That's a distinction the administration likes to make, but it also concedes it doesn't have the personnel to handle the volume at the assigned ports of entry, and it also admits many of these immigrants don't know where those ports of entry are in the first place.
Major Garrett and David Begnaud, thank you both for your time.